Okay, Madam Vice Mayor, you are live on YouTube.
I would like to call this meeting to order. So I'd like to first adopt the agenda.
Okay, well, I would certainly move the adoption of the agenda.
Great. Great. I second, and let's adopt the agenda.
Okay, done deal.
Done deal. So I do not have the agenda actually open, but do we have any public comments on this matter?
We do not have any public comment on this, on any matters so far.
Okay, so if that changes, just let us know.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess we will hand it over to Jennifer and Tracy and our auditor today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so we have today Ahmed Badawi. He is the partner of Badawi and Associates, who is the auditor that we selected back in January, at the January-February meeting. Oh no, later than that because of COVID. Anyway, that we adopted the agreement earlier this year, and he will be auditing the city's finances for fiscal year 1920, which is our current fiscal year, as well as 2 more years, and has options to extend for additional years. We just last week had our interim field work conducted, and this is the standard meeting that's required by auditing protocols where the auditor meets with the finance subcommittee to make various inquiries and present you with different information. Go ahead, Ahmed.
All right, well, good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to your meeting. Again, I'm Ahmed Badawi, and I would be the audit partner for the City of Lafayette. So I have a small presentation that I sent, and I'm not sure if you would like me to share it also on the screen as I go through it, really
Sure.
However you prefer.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So I'll go ahead and share my screen then, and then we go from there, and we get started.
You know, since I'm co-hosting or whatever, maybe I have to pull it up on my computer and share it from my side, Ahmed.
Actually, I think I can, let me know if you can see it.
I can see it.
Oh,
Does
good.
that work?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can limit me as the host from, I'm getting really good at this because I've been doing this for—
No, thank you. I've just never played host before.
You can limit me from doing that if you choose to as the host. But it sounds
I'm
like
happy to have you run the presentation.
Okay, all right. So, this is just a small presentation, and the purpose of my presentation today is to communicate to the governing body, which I'm doing through the subcommittee, what you should expect from an audit, the things that you should expect from an audit, the things that you should not expect from an audit, what areas are we covering, what areas we think are more of a primary risk. And then, of course, we would like some input from you as to what concerns you and just your understanding of the different risks that the city is exposed to and how they can impact our audit. So I'm going to get started, and you'll see here on the agenda, I'll let you know who the engagement team will be, what are the deliverables and the scope of our audit, the areas of primary audit risk, to see if you have any input for me, provide you some of the required communications as your independent auditor, a brief overview of the new accounting standards coming the city's way, and see if you have any questions for me. Of course, feel free to interrupt me anytime you have questions. So I'll start by the engagement team, and on slide number 4, I will be the engagement partner, so I am the individual ultimately responsible for the entire audit, from planning to executing to final reporting. We always have a quality control reviewer. This person is always in the background, and the role is to review my work and making sure that I adhere to professional standards and that I obtain sufficient audit evidence to support my opinion. And they also do an independent review of the financial statements before it's issued. We have access to an IT specialist We don't always use him, but we do have access to him. And we use him whenever we feel that the system, the computer system that the city is using is just too complex for us as CPAs to be able to evaluate the controls embedded in that system. Often this is the case when the city is developing applications in-house or significantly modifying applications, writing its own programs and things like that. This is when an IT specialist is more needed. Obviously, in situations where your vendor is hosting the software and most controls are provided by the vendors, and then we as CPAs are able to do that evaluations. We have a senior who's working with me on the engagement, Wenwei, and we have a professional staff. We also have a manager on the engagement, but honestly, I am very heavily involved in the audit. That makes the manager role not as significant in this situation. But we do have a manager assigned to the engagement. If I move on to slide number 5, and I'm actually trying to see if I can switch it to, never mind, my apology. When I switch it to presentation mode, it takes me to it shows you the presenter screen, so I just need to fix it. So I'll just keep it this way. But on slide number 5, the deliverables and the scope of our audit, what we were engaged to report on. So mainly we were engaged to provide an opinion on the city's basic financial statements. That's the comprehensive annual financial report that the city issues every year. Because the city is subject to government auditing standards, we're also required to issue a report on internal control over financial reporting and on compliance and other matters. It is also our understanding that there are 2 other entities that we will be providing audit opinion on: the La Morinda Fee and Finance Authority and the La Morinda School Bus Transportation Agency. Also, we will be issuing a management letter if we have any comments or findings on internal controls or compliance. We will be performing an agreed upon procedures on the GAN limit, the appropriation limit. That is the limit that you adopt every year, and it limits how much the city can budget from tax revenues. And then finally, the communications with the governing body. And part of it is what I'm doing today. There will be another communication at the conclusion of the audit, and that is to report to you the results of the audit, the type of opinion we issued, and whether we had any findings to be reported to you. If I move on to slide number 6. Just give me a second here. On slide number 6, the areas of primary audit risk. So I just wanted to kind of bring to your attention what we would normally focus on when we're looking at an audit like this. The risk of management override of controls. This is a risk that exists in any audit pretty much. Management are the one who are responsible for designing internal controls. They are responsible for monitoring those controls, and they can possibly choose to override them if at some point they decide to do so. So we have to design our audit procedures to address that risk, or at least mitigate it or bring it to an acceptable level. So we do that by making sure that we assign more experienced staff to more complex area, that we incorporate an element of unpredictability in the audit process. So we don't tell the city ahead of time every account we're going to look at, every test we're going to perform. And we don't want to keep repeating the same tests year after year. We're going to try every year to introduce, maybe looking at a smaller account or just something different year over year. We will be testing journal entries prepared by management. We have actually already started doing that. We will be reviewing accounting policies and how they're applied and making sure that they're consistently applied. Any estimates done by management, we review it to make sure that it's free of bias. We evaluate business rationale for any unusual transactions. And then we evaluate any related party transactions. So transactions with either management, companies owned by management, or governing body, and so on. Revenue and receivables are areas of higher risk also by default. And we really believe that there are areas actually where auditing it is easy because we rely a lot on confirmations. So we send confirmations to the county and ask them to confirm to us all funds submitted to the city. For property taxes and other purposes, we reconcile that back to the city's accounting records and make sure that they do reconcile. We confirm sales tax received from the state board, from the state. We also confirm hotels. We confirm basically all your significant revenue sources. In addition to that, we perform testing on revenues that are generated by the city itself by doing billing, for example, license, permits, fees, those types of things. So we would be performing testing on those types of revenues, including also the recreation revenues. So that would be for the recreation revenues is normally part of the governmental activities in most cities we audit. In your situation is part of the proprietary funds. But it doesn't really change the fact that it will still be subject to the same type of testing to ensure that the proper fees are being used, that there is good record and accounting for those. Purchasing and cash disbursement and payroll, these are areas that we consider to be significant transaction classes or significant audit areas. So we do testing of expenditures in general. We look for a variety of things, coding to the right fund, to the right program, to the right account, and also the validity of the expenditure and whether it actually in fact occurred and proper authorization and things like that. And same scenario with payroll. We also perform search for unrecorded liabilities. So at the end of the year, after the city closes its books, we go through the disbursement for the months of July, August, and September, all the way until we issue the audit opinion. And we're looking for any material disbursement that related to the previous year that wasn't appropriately accrued to the previous year. Equity and fund balance, we are looking for the categories of fund balance, making sure that they can be properly supported. So any committed category would require council action, council resolution, committing the fund balance or the revenue sources for the specified purpose, making sure that the restricted amounts, we understand what is the law or the third party restricting those funds. And that it have enough specificity to be reflected on the financial statements. Obviously, just giving the COVID-19 situation, I think fund balance and revenues and also cost allocation are becoming in areas of sensitivity for us because there is just a lot of focus on from clients on making sure that they have a good fund balance. We're finding about clients who are trying to recapture costs that maybe they didn't capture in the past from other funds and trying to bring it back to the general fund. So it's just making us looking more closely into activities relating to fund balance and cost allocation, just because of all what our clients are trying to do right now. They're really trying to get a very accurate image of their fund balance and what they can and cannot do. So, and then cash and bank reconciliation, we think that the bank reconciliation is one of the most critical controls because you're comparing a third party records to your records and making sure that they do reconcile. So we look to make sure that they are done timely and that there are no unusual or unreconciled items from months to months. So those would be the areas, the primary areas that we would focus on. But of course, like in any audit, we go through the city's accounting records and we go account by account. And for each account, we will be performing some procedures. It's a question of how much procedures we're going to be performing. But at a minimum, we would be comparing every account to the budget and to the prior year. And if it fluctuated significantly or didn't change at all, we'll probably be asking questions as to why did or it did not. So that's pretty much is the scope of our audit and the areas that we will be emphasizing on. On the next slide, just really some questions and communications to the committee. The purpose is to make sure we have the right understanding about the structure and the individuals that we're dealing with, and also to see whether the committee have any input or maybe interest to that certain areas be looked at more closely. So on the first bullet point, just wanted to confirm that in terms of the governance structure and who we should be communicating with, that we look at management to be the primary group that we will be dealing with throughout the audit. Jennifer is obviously our main contact person. And on an as needed basis, obviously things gets elevated to Tracy or even Nirup, but for the most part, it is Jennifer that we will be working with. The reason why we pose that question is because professional standards do require us to verify that, because maybe management is giving us that idea, but that's not the understanding of the governing body. So that's the idea of just confirming that information.
So do you want us to actually confirm that that's correct, or?
I think if you just have a disagreement, you can let me know, but otherwise, I'm assuming it is correct.
Okay.
I mean, I don't want to be too, it's just for our own risk assessment. So that there is we don't have to follow any formal process in confirming that or not confirming. So, the allocation of responsibilities between those charged with governance and management. Again, those charged with governance are only for oversight, and they're not involved in the day-to-day activities or approvals or authorizations. So that is our understanding of the structure. So unless you disagree, I'll move on to the next bullet point. Okay. And then this is really a question whether the city's objectives and strategies, whether the short-term or long-term, poses risk or that may result in material misstatements in the financial statements. And what we mean by that, are you starting to take on new operations or new activities, or closing on new operations or new activities that just the accounting for that may increases the risk of errors happening in the financial statements. So some of these long-term objectives that, if anything, that you would like to share with us.
Well, so you are already looking at the Parks and Recreation, which is an enterprise operation within our budget process. Mm-hmm. So I was looking at this question, and I was kind of thinking, this may not quite fit what you described, but we also have contract services for our public works. And I've always been interested in some assurance that that's working properly, or we're getting what we're paying for in terms of contract services. And I don't know if that's in your scope or not, but since we contract to an outside entity for those services, it would be nice if we could verify that in fact we have a nice connection between what we're paying and what we're receiving in services. So I would just throw that out there as a potential thing to consider under this. And the other item I thought of is the fact that we have a lot of commissions, and the commissions require staffing, and staffing therefore should be reporting its time and hours related to that, and verifying that we're getting a good relationship between the cost and the actual usage of staff, I think is also very important. So we can just verify that that's connected and it's working properly.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that. In terms of the contracted service, so just to make sure if I understood correctly, so if you're contracting out public works that you're basically have an outside company who's managing projects, doing those types of things for you, it would be hard for us as auditors to evaluate whether they're properly managing projects, or because it would not be our area of expertise. I mean, obviously, we would be things that we can verify is, are they getting paid in accordance with the contract? Are they billing in accordance with the contract? Those types of things would be things that we can verify. But how much the contract is versus the service that they're providing, I think that would not be something that we will be in a position to evaluate.
Okay, well, if that's beyond your scope, I certainly understand that. I just think that if you're not aware, you should be aware that we do that. And it is, for me, just one of those things that we don't really know clearly and distinctly whether there's a good connection between the two. So whatever's within your scope, I think would be helpful.
No, it's definitely good to know that. So I appreciate the information. All right. I think I guess maybe that was also relevant to it. Any matters the committee consider as warranting a particular attention during the audit. Maybe that's the same that you were referring to, but
well, I think it's really about the same thing. And under that item, that bullet point, I was also thinking of our senior transportation services, which I think at this point we're covering the cost for all lumber into senior services. I don't know if that's true or not. And so there's just a fair amount of money now that's being allocated to that, whether it's working properly, whether it's all checking out and balancing. If that's within your scope, it would be nice to be able to verify that.
Okay. All right. We were looking into that senior transportation service. So thank you for your input there.
Sure.
I also wanted to ask you whether you had any significant communications with regulators. So any state agencies, county agencies, grand jury, anything that we need to be aware of? Well,
we get an annual grand jury. Nirup would know if we have anything going on with the grand jury. It's not that we're being investigated, it's more that we're looking at responding to whatever they're asking. Nirup, is there anything floating there that's financial that you're aware of?
Today, we received a grand jury report on the delivery of police services throughout the county. That's the only grand jury report that we're working on at the moment. And we have until August to respond.
And once again, that's another service that we contract for in the city. So once again, I don't know if that fits your scope or not, but there's something going on there.
Yeah, I mean, again, with the contract service, I think the scope of our audit will be ensuring that these payments are done in accordance with the contract. But in terms of evaluating the value, I mean, I had a city that used to get the fire service from the county, and at some point they felt it was just getting too expensive, and they decided to create their own fire department. And it was they're very happy that they got out of the service. And I have many others that they think their fire department are just way too expensive to run, and they're very happy contracting out the service. So it's just very hard for us to be like, all we look at is it a valid contract? Did it go through the proper authorization and approval procedures? And are the payments done in accordance with the contract? Are the billing done in accordance with the contract? And so on.
Ahmed, have you done any agreed upon procedures work with regard to that? You know, like if we were to get an agreement with the vendor that they would be willing to open their books or let us review particular things. Have you ever stepped into that kind of job?
I mean, we have done audits and agreed upon procedures on vendors, for example, like franchises that pay the city based on obviously the service that they provide the city, customers in the city. So we would go into and inspect their records, make sure that they have the right customers, that they capture all customers that are residing in the city and so on. In terms of, I had some cities that contracted service for building permits, for planning service. I mean, we can do, if you want to verify compliance with certain aspects of the contract, then yes. But obviously it has to fit within our, the framework of our professional standards. And
Sure.
Most of those agreed upon procedures will focus on the city set the criteria, the city let us know what to go look for. We come and report to you the results of our procedures. But we will not be able in an agreed upon procedures to, for example, tell you what best practice would be, or,
Sure.
or something like that. But yeah, if it's something within obviously our, that is allowed by our professional standards, and we think it's within our area of expertise that we are able to evaluate it, then of course we can do that.
So Mike, I have a question for you. I like where you're going. I like these ideas. If they can't provide it, should we try to pursue it some other way? I just don't want to forget this if this is, because it seems like a good idea.
Well, I don't know exactly how to proceed. And I think one of the things that typically comes up in these audit meetings is there's, you know, the auditor says, okay, the managers all leave the room, and now the politicians tell us the real story, what's going on, all the bad things you're worried about. You know, I'm not worried about this, but it's something that I think we need to be assured in some fashion that it's working properly. So I guess we can discuss that, and the group can consider it, Jennifer, Tracy, what we can do to maybe test and make sure we're getting our money's worth for these different contracts that we've been pursuing. I mean, some of these have been running serially for quite some time. And usually my experience has been when you do that, things start kind of falling off the track and corners get cut, and people get used to doing things a certain way. They may not be consistent with the contract, but you know, it worked last year, so we'll do it again this year. And you know, so anyway, a check on that internally might be an exercise we could take on through our staff. I don't know. That might be the best way to pursue it. And
sometimes you can set criteria that is not necessarily in the contract. You're basically, for example, there may be certain things specified in the contract saying that if the company is going to be providing you permitting service, that they need to have a secondary person reviewing all permits before they're issued, and that they need to use a fee schedule that you provided them. So we can go in and make sure that this happened, that on every permit that was issued, there was a second signer who reviewed and approved that that permit, that the fee was the proper fee schedule that the city provided. But then you can also expand further, and even if it's not in the contract, you can say, okay, you had to hire somebody to do this work. Did you go out to bid, or you just hired the same contractor that you use every time? And it just gives you information on whether they're really even putting an effort to try to find the best vendor to provide the service. Are there documentation that they're actually putting that good faith effort to try to get the best price for the city if they're purchasing things on behalf of the city? So you can, as long as they allow you access to the records, whatever criteria you set is something that we can look for, assuming it's financial related, obviously.
Right. Okay, thank you.
All right. I think other than that, I will just move on to the required communications on slide number 10. And this slide is designed to just let you know what are we responsible for as your auditors and versus what management is responsible for. So on the left side is our responsibility. And obviously this is not all inclusive, but just in summary, we're responsible mainly for providing an opinion on the city's financial statements, whether they're fairly stated in accordance with US GAAP. We're responsible for evaluating internal control over financial reporting, including the tone at the top, meaning that making sure that management is responding to audit findings, is coming up with corrective action to address audit findings, that they are sending the right message to the rest of the organization about the importance of controls, the consequences of committing fraud, and so on. We're responsible for evaluating compliance with laws and regulations that could have a material effect on the financial statements. We're responsible for ensuring that financial statements are clear and transparent. So even though sometimes accounting standards may not be specifically prohibiting certain things from being done, but if we feel that they're causing confusion or lack of clarity, we will definitely ask the city to clarify the issue and make it more clear. And then finally, we are responsible for communicating with the governing body regarding our audits. Management have responsibilities in this process as well. So hiring our firm does not relieve management from its responsibility towards the completeness and accuracy of the financial statements. Our audit is done on a test basis, so we're only in a position to provide reasonable but not absolute assurance about the financials. Also, management is the one responsible for establishing and maintaining internal control over financial reporting, for making all financial records available to us during the audit process, for establishing control that will prevent and detect fraud, inform us of all known and suspected fraud, comply with laws and regulations, and take corrective action on audit findings. On slide number 11, in terms of independence, it is solely our responsibility to evaluate and maintain our independence. We obviously follow the AICPA professional standards and the California Board of Accountancy rules. And we really look at independence in a variety of ways. So there are independence in substance, which basically means that we are providing other services that impair our independence. And we have identified that assisting the city in drafting the financial statements is a service that does impair our independence, unless we take precautions and put safeguards in place. And that's what the professional standards require us to do. So some of the safeguards that we are taking is that we have an independent reviewer not involved with the audit who is going to be reviewing those financial statements. But we also evaluate on the city's side whether the city have designated an individual with suitable skill, knowledge, and experience to oversee our service and to review and take responsibility for the financial statements. And obviously in this situation, that individual is Jennifer. We also look at independence in terms of appearance. So we are careful about not having any audit team members who may have direct or indirect relations with the city or city staff. We also limit socializing with city staff outside of the city environment. I mean, we're not against every now and then maybe having lunch with management, but that's the extent of things because we don't want that independence in appearance also to be questioned. Obviously, we determined so far that we are independent, but this is something that we continue to monitor as long as we're providing audit service for the city. In terms of timing of the audit is scheduled to be performed during the week of September 28th. And as Jennifer mentioned earlier, we have also spent a week doing risk assessment and preliminary work in the city, and that was the week of May 18th. Finally, on slide number 12 is a listing of all the new accounting standards that have been issued so far and their implementation date. So at least the one good piece of news here is that all the new accounting standards have been postponed by 1 year due to COVID-19. So, so that's statement number 95. That's what it's doing, is postponing the effective date of all the authoritative guidance. So at least the city doesn't have to put the effort in implementing new accounting standards this year. But again, you can see that there is a long list of standards coming, but at least this would be something to worry about in fiscal year 21. With that, I want to say thank you for allowing us the opportunity. I am more than happy to answer any additional questions. I will keep my screen just in case I need to get back to any of the slides for a few seconds.
So Mike, do you have any questions?
No, I'm fine. I think it was a good presentation.
Me too, I don't either.
All right, so I stopped sharing my screen, and I actually don't have anything else. I want to say again, thank you. We're definitely excited to be working with the city, and first impression was very positive, which is expected. I mean, I did know a little bit. It's not our first attempt, or not the first time we bid on Lafayette. I think we bid on them before, and so we were a little bit familiar. Obviously, I know Jennifer a little bit from the CSMFO, so we kind of had some expectations, and I think our expectations were met. We have a positive impression about that, about our experience. So, but obviously, we haven't done the audit yet, so we're just learning about the city.
Right.
It won't change, I promise.
No, that's my feeling, but I'm not in a position to say.
All that talk about independence, come on now.
I know, exactly.
I'm not swaying him, I'm just telling him. Okay, thank you, Ahmed, for coming today.
Of course, thank you for having me. I will leave the meeting now if you don't have any additional questions for me. Okay.
No, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so I think we're gonna, and then we go on to the budget, right?
Yep.
Okay, I'll just take the lead and then Jennifer can chime in, and I'm going to take questions. So I'm assuming that you read my brief staff report, and what I wanted to do was I'm going to share my screen and take you through sort of the 5-year projection, because I think that basically shows you sort of everything that you need to know about the budget. So, okay. So can you guys see my spreadsheet here?
Yep.
Okay. So a couple of things before we start. The good news is that I think we've pulled up quite a bit on projects and froze spending, so that one of the things we were trying to do was really sort of build up money, not spend a lot of money, you know, in the last part of this fiscal year, so that we could build up our reserve a little bit for next year. And we've managed to, based on my projections, we'll manage to do that. We will actually come in about $1.8 million under what we budgeted, so that we will have, we're projecting about $11.67 million in ending fund balance. And that equates to 80% of the expenditures. The one thing that you have to remember, those are percentages, right? So if we spend less money, then the percentage is higher. So, so as an example, if our budget is lower next year, then the amount of money that equals 60% of that budget is also a lower number. So it's a little bit weird when you do it by a percentage, because it's somewhat counterintuitive, but obviously that's the formula that we've chosen. So I just wanted to kind of bring that to your attention when we're looking at the numbers. So one of the reasons that you're like, wow, 80%, that's amazing, is because we're spending less money. So this $11.67 million is 80% of what we spent. And we really pulled back on the spending this year. So going forward, I should say projected, we are looking at revenues for next year. And again, these that are highlighted, these lines in the 3, these are the ones that revenue sources that we feel are most vulnerable in this COVID downturn. So for sales tax, this estimated number is a lower number, obviously, because of the last couple of months of fiscal year 1920. And then going forward into 2021, we feel like it's going to go down a little bit further. This actually includes some of those potential sales tax deferrals that businesses can take. And then going forward, these figures, we had a meeting with our sales tax analyst, and we sort of they've done their best to do some forward projections as to how they think the economy is going to recover. And these are conservative. So they're going up about 2% a year. So I did question them a little bit. If we decreased by a total of, 20% from the high to the low, and they're suggesting that we're only going to increase 2%, seems a little like, so you're telling me it's going to take 8 to 10 years to pull out of this hole. And I think that's probably too pessimistic, but let's talk about, we just put these numbers in as being conservative for the next 5 years. So the other thing I want to caution you about is when we look at these 5-year projections, I don't worry too much about these out years, these last 3 years, because again, there's just so many unknowns, mostly concentrating on this year and next year. The next thing that's going to be also very impacted is the TOT, the transient occupancy tax, the hotel tax. So that's a little bit of a double whammy at the Park Hotel, because they also have a restaurant that's not open at all, I believe. They're not even doing takeout, and they've shut down completely. So there's basically no TOT there. So again, normally we get about $750,000 a year out of the TOT. We're projecting about 550. Again, that's a couple of months closed completely this fiscal year. And then again, a conservative figure for next year. We don't know how long it's going to take them to ramp up. We don't know if there's going to be limitations on their occupancy. Their restaurants obviously going to probably be limited. And it may take a while for people to get even comfortable traveling again and going to places like hotels. So again, we've taken a very conservative approach and then sort of grown that again by about 2% in the next few years. Again, I believe that's conservative. I'm hopeful that that's very conservative. So that's what we've done with that. And then the third one, planning fees. So in the past couple of years, we have generated over $1 million in planning fees for the general fund. Clearly something to slow down because of COVID. So we think that that's going to slow down in the next year to be about $850,000. I mean, there will still be development, but we think it might be at a slightly lower pace. So again, those I think are the 3 that are going to be affected most by the downturn and the recovery. Any questions on the revenue side? No. Okay.
I think you're smart to be super conservative.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure.
I would much rather come to you and say I was wrong. We have more money than I thought, than the other
Yes.
way around.
Right.
So on the uses side, again, for the fiscal year 2021, we did include all of the $1 million cuts that you had authorized at a prior meeting. So these numbers reflect all of those cuts and all of the deferrals into sinking funds. So again, these highlighted yellow things are, we deferred some of the expenses, but my advice and counsel to you is that we shouldn't defer them, keep doing that, right? So as an example, in library maintenance, it's normally $200,000 a year that we put away. This year we cut it by half, but we need to make that amount up in the future. So for the next 4 years, I have put in $225,000. So by the end of the 5 years, we have caught up with the deferral. And I think we really need to, look carefully at doing that. It's way too easy to just defer those things because it doesn't feel like it hurts. It feels like it's an easy thing to do, just not put that money away for a rainy day. But then it rains and then it really hurts because you didn't do it for 3 or 4 or 5 years. So all of these numbers reflect going back in the next year to previous levels. Some of those things could be, potentially be looked at again, like core area maintenance and stormwater pollution. But when we were talking to the public works management team, they reminded us that many years ago we did cuts in core area maintenance. First for the recession, and then, just because we didn't have the money to do it because the revenue wasn't keeping up. We actually never really got back to where we were. So they were already sort of operating on a lower expense level. And so we're cutting them further. So in the group, when we were going through it with the managers, was taking notes. All the things that we're doing, all the cuts that we're making, we tried to reduce the impact as much as possible, but it's not entirely possible to make everything painless, right? There will be reductions to landscaping and potentially striping and certain things like that. So just want to set the expectation. You can't cut a budget by $1 million and expect that you won't actually see reductions in service. So going forward, we made these cuts and we look at next year. You see that our projected ending fund balance actually decreases by about $1.5 million to 10.2, and that keeps us at 63%. So again, we've pulled back on the spending, and that's one of the reasons that even though the fund balance decreased, we're still able to sort of meet our 60% target. Going forward, again, if it takes us 18 months or 2 years to start really making strides to pull out of this economic hole, it's about 9.1. See, again, we're going to probably end up, depending on if you decide to make cuts or not, end up pulling about another $1 million out of the reserve, and that'll bring us to 55%. So it's probably too soon right now to really make any additional cuts. But what I want you to do this year, which is a little bit different than what we do in prior years, I am treating this budget in sort of 2 parts. I feel like we made significant amount of cuts, and that really helped us to maintain the 63%. I just want to call your attention to what the budget would have looked like if we didn't make any of those cuts. All right, we would have been at 50% reserve, right? So I just, I do that for a couple reasons. I want you to be confident that you did that you did absolutely the right things by making those cuts early and making them deep enough to make a difference. Okay,
Thank you.
going back to what I was saying was, normally we do this proposed budget for the year, and then in December we do a revise. And those are generally, there's not a lot of difference between the proposed and the revised. There's only, you know, rebudgeting things that we didn't actually spend the prior year, or putting in some things that that you've approved during, you know, June to December. We're going to know, right now we just don't know anything. We're still in the midst of a lockdown. We have no idea how fast things are going to rebound or when it's going to start. So I really think that we're looking at kind of two separate budgets this year. We're looking at a budget from, you know, June through December. But when we start looking to revise this budget in the October-November timeframe, we're going to know a lot more. So we'll be able to give you better numbers. So you may want to make significant changes at that time. You may want to, if it's not looking good, you may want to make additional cuts at that time. If things are actually looking better than we predict, you could certainly maybe alleviate some of the cuts that you made. So my message to you is sort of looking at it in two stages this year, which is different than what we've done in the past. So do you guys have any questions specifically? I think this particular table shows you sort of everything you need to know. So one thing, you know, these numbers don't look so good out here.
No, they don't. They look really awful.
They look bad, but again, I don't think that you can really, you know, I think we'll have savings that we normally have savings. I think we'll probably underspend as we usually do, because the managers have been taught that, you know, we don't just spend our budget, right? We are very conservative when we spend the money. I wouldn't worry about this. Honestly, if you look at past budgets, when things were actually going pretty well, you'll sort of see the same thing. You'll see this decreasing. That actually doesn't happen. So these look like scary numbers, but we have time to address that. We don't need to make super deep cuts right now, because we really are in a situation where we don't know what's going to happen. Okay.
So Tracy, I always try to find out if we have any sense of changes in our contract for police services. And are we getting any sense that there's any negotiations going on, or something that might change that number significantly?
So actually the number already changed significantly. That number went up by about 6% this year. And that's because I believe that they had been negotiating for the past couple of years. They hadn't had any raises. And I believe they just came to an agreement where they get like a 6% raise this year, and then 4 or 5% raises going forward. So
okay, so that's kind of baked into these numbers now. You have that in there?
Yeah, so there's two things you need to consider with the police. Yes, what we do, and we always do with police, is we always budget a full complement of police at top step. Now, we go into that knowing that we are going to underspend that, usually by about $300,000 to $400,000 a year. But we budget it that way for a couple of reasons. One, officers will come and go. And so we don't actually necessarily know who we're going to get. If we get a rookie, they're less expensive, but we could get somebody very experienced who's a top step. So we just budget at the top. The other thing is that this gives the police a lot of flexibility within their budget to implement things that the council has said are priorities. We've been able to do, without budgeting additional money, camera systems. We were able to buy a lot of equipment for the PSPSs and move very quickly. They were able, for example, to go out and bid on gently used generators and get them for like a half or a third of the price of what we would have had to pay new, because they had the flexibility in their budget to do that. And the chief understands that he's sort of also expected to manage that budget and not use it all. So we do expect some savings to come from that. And that's another reason that while these numbers look scary, and I do expect that we get savings out of the budgets, they're usually a lot more than $400,000 a year.
Okay,
That
so
was a long answer.
Well, we've done this before together, so I'm not surprised, but there were kind of two components to my question. The first piece was just, has there been a renegotiated contract? Sounds like there has been, and we've taken that into account. So that's already factored in. Then the second part is your conservative budgeting, and I've understood that. And I just think that one of the things going forward, as we look at this particular recession, maybe we might need to trim that a little bit and move money around into other places that are going to start looking lean, only because if we are really just creating a reserve that we are pretty sure is not going to be spent, when we do our assessment going forward, utilizing that up front might make a little more sense if we know we've got a problem on the revenue side. You follow what I'm saying? It's just this circumstance might justify tightening some of those budgetary allocations to get them closer to what we expect, only because we will be looking for dollars on the core maintenance and the stormwater and all these other things that are going to smack us and we have no control over. So it's just a note. It's not a direction.
And I completely agree. And I think that maybe the time to look at that, like I said, is when we do this again in December, when we see.
That's fine.
Because I think the cuts that you made, there will be noticeable, but they won't be drastic. And I don't want to ever put you in a position where we've given the police, an extra couple $100,000 and we're in a drastic position where you would hate to say, well, you've got a couple extra $100,000 in police, but things elsewhere look dire, so maybe we'll have to lay people off or cut more deeply into other programs. Absolutely understand that at that point, you would absolutely want to move those dollars.
Okay. And then the other one, of course, is Public Works. And I'm not sure what schedule we're on for negotiating that contract. And I kind of brought up with the auditor the idea that we should be looking at that. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
That's all right.
We actually,
what I'm saying.
Yeah, I heard you before. We actually did just, we used to be with MCE, and now we are with TerraCare. And I believe this is, I think we've been a full year. So Public Works actually did go back and bid out their contract. And we did, we did go with a different company. And I think if you're interested in the details, we could potentially have Donna Feehan or Mike Moran write up a little memo. Part of the thing, it's interesting. I'm not sure if they will tell you this. I'm not sure we saved money necessarily, but we started getting more value for the money that we were spending. Because I think what they will tell you and what we have heard is that MCE did not pay their employees very well, and their employees basically just often wouldn't show up to work. So even though you weren't necessarily having to pay for them if they didn't show up, you also didn't have the manpower available to do the jobs that you needed to get done, right? So things were sort of already suffering in that we wanted to do work that we just didn't have the manpower to do because MCE wasn't able to provide it consistently. So I think there's sort of two sides to that. We might actually be paying slightly more per hour, but the crew shows up, they're there every day, they're actually getting the work done. So
how long is the contract for?
do you know, Naru?
And, I think, Mike, I have a question for you. Are you hearing complaints about the quality of maintenance?
No,
Or is it just good? I understand.
I'm just asking the questions
Okay.
because we haven't asked the questions. And
Sure,
I don't know the answers, and I've been doing this for a while and I still don't know the answers. So
certainly.
it's been a process that's been so sub rosa that I worry.
Got
It
it.
becomes kind of just the way we do business and no one asks any questions.
Yeah,
And then you find out later on, oh, gee, someone was skimming some money or something happened or, whatever. So that's my concern.
certainly. I know the Telecat contract is fairly recent, as Tracy said. It's about a year or a little longer than that. And so far, Mike and Donna have been very pleased with the quality of service and the responsiveness. But as you know, we can have them send the council an email just updating you on the contract and what we get from it.
Well, I don't know if that's important. I just think that the key to me is not to fall asleep when it comes to these
Certainly.
services that are so sub rosa. I mean,
Right.
there's guys out there working, they got the trucks, they put the cones out in the street, they cut everything down, looks great. But is someone really checking to make sure we're getting our money's worth? And are we doing a good process
Yeah.
for a long enough contract that we can nail down good costs for what we're trying to get done for the services we want?
Those
So
are,
that's all.
yeah.
I don't need a report, just
I will
asking the question.
respond that Donna and Mike are very happy. They're happy they
Good.
made the change. They have a good crew that's doing the job. And as far as the length of the contract, we can double check and ensure that there are checkpoints along the way to make sure that we're getting our money's worth from them.
Good, that sounds great.
We have been in that situation before, so I do understand, Mike.
Yeah, no, I'm not suspicious. I'm just asking that we check.
Yeah.
The other one I wanted just to go at real quickly was stormwater pollution. I mean, I know this keeps going up. And at one point we were looking at the street sweeping being something we could pay through our Recycle Smart fees or something like that. Or there was some idea we could charge that street sweeping to the waste management franchise fees we were getting. And I'm not clear if anyone's done any investigation on that or if there's been clarified that that's possible or not possible. So does anyone know anything about
So
Or
I
was
had- I
that
hadn't
we
heard
had?
it. Well,
Go
the
ahead.
franchise fees that we get from Waste Management, some of it goes to roads, right? So we're sending 100% of that to roads.
that? Right.
Anything else is goes to the general fund, and we're already transferring money from the general fund to stormwater pollution. So I'm not
Okay,
really
so
sure there's
It doesn't make any difference.
a win there.
Yeah. Okay.
Tracy, I thought at
So-
one point we had talked about that we have extra funds with the Solid Waste Authority that maybe they would
Oh,
release to us if we were going to use it for street
extra
sweeping.
funds. Oh, I think there might be I think that there may be a reserve. We can. Are you still on that board?
I
Mike?
am. And so there is a reserve. The problem is that now the contract's gotten changed and we're beginning to burn that reserve.
Mhm.
So it's really not going to be available as we thought it was a year or so ago. So I thought it was a franchise fee thing, but if it was based on this reserve fund, that's not going to be available to us too much longer.
Yeah, and the franchise fees only come in two parts. One for the roads,
Okay.
and one is general fund anyway. So
Okay.
we're
All right. I
already
just thought I'd query.
subsidizing.
Yeah,
We do
all right.
have money left in a sinking fund for stormwater pollution because at some point we knew this was coming, so we started putting money away, and now we have to start taking it out.
Correct.
I think we'll be good, you know, for maybe 2 or 3 years. But this has been an ongoing problem. Everything gets more expensive, and there's absolutely no way to generate additional revenue.
Understood. No, it's unfunded mandate, no doubt.
And I don't think we had asked the question, to be honest with you, just like, and what would happen if we didn't do it? What if we just were in violation? We never want to be in violation, but I'm like, well, is the penalty worse than paying the money, you know? And I don't think anybody's been brave enough to actually.
Yes, all right.
I'm not hearing this conversation.
I did not hear it either.
It's a financial, you know, but we're not in violation. But
Good. We shouldn't be in violation.
Thank you. Hey, so Tracy, can I, is there, I mean, as we start to reopen, you know, I hate to wait all the way till December if we are seeing things not going well. Are there any checkpoints that we might want to put in to kind of go, okay, like to get numbers earlier? I don't even know if we have access to that. It would be the sales tax and the hotel tax, right? All that stuff, right?
So maybe Jennifer and I have talked very, very briefly, so I'm hoping not putting her on the spot with this, but I think we've talked about, normally we don't track things sort of quarterly or monthly because it's just a lot, but I think Jennifer had talked about putting together a tracking system where we were looking at it more closely. So there's 2 things that have to happen. One, we need to be able to close our books and find out where we are for this year. And I think that generally wraps up right around August. And then the next thing would be to look at, you know, the July, August, September. That would give us a quarter's worth of data. And that's also going to be dependent on when our county in particular decides that they're going to open. I mean, other counties, like what, 47 out of 58 counties have already moved to phase 4. So that's going to make a difference, right? If we're in the same phase through September, that is going to make a huge difference. And so I think we can keep you updated. Jennifer can tell me, I don't know if quarterly or monthly, or because some of our revenues lag is the other thing.
Right. I'm just doing the best we can, right? And thank you. I think that it is really good idea to track it as best we can without being too burdensome. But thank you.
So I think one of the easiest ways to do that going forward is internally, we have a monthly budget report in OpenGov, and OpenGov is the financial transparency platform that we use. We have a lot of historical information in there, and the data populates automatically every evening. So I think that one of the things Tracy and I had talked about is that I can go in there and make public a monthly report that will show based on the same period in prior fiscal years where our revenues are coming in for the fiscal year. So we'll be able to see within 24 hours how we're tracking, like, our July revenues compared to the previous fiscal year, and accepting any anomalies. We should be, we should hopefully come off. We should see a downward trend similar to what we've budgeted. And I can also add the budget in there, which is a little bit hard because it doesn't take into account the timing differences. But I think that will give us, kind of a real-time tracking on whether or not our budget estimates are coming to fruition for 2021. And then, of course, I'll also have my quarterly updates like usual.
That sounds great. Super. So you guys, I did have another question on, I was just looking at the summary, going off of those subjects, and those last items on the, so this is on it's page 4, I guess, is the summary, the funds and balances and changes. And,
okay.
And those last 3, housing successor,
Yeah.
redevelopment. They
Those
look
are,
really different than from last year.
you know what, they might be, and Jennifer and I have to really go over that. I want to get this out. And that is what it is, and they're negative because there's still a lot of outstanding debt there.
Right. And so, but
so-
I just, like the numbers they look really different than last year. That's all I'm noticing.
Yeah, so Jennifer, maybe just mark that down that we just, I think I haven't put in some of the numbers that need to be there, so.
Okay,
But yes, I will look at that.
cool. And we're having a school bus meeting soon,
Mhm.
and we're gonna have to take a really, really, really close look at whether it will be viable. So that's another thing to throw at this, a variable to throw at this.
The school bus numbers they're in our budget here, but they are sort of completely separate. So whatever happens with school bus doesn't necessarily, well, it doesn't
It shouldn't.
affect the general fund unless the council decided that they wanted to supplement, in which case you'd have to take it from somewhere.
Right.
Susan, when will you make a decision about the upcoming fiscal year?
For the bus?
Yeah.
We haven't even looked at the numbers yet. And so I would imagine if we look at those numbers and the projections, they're putting them together now. So we have a meeting next Tuesday.
Okay.
So June 2nd. I can forward you minutes or whatever, take notes and send them to you.
I guess because the whole, the way the schools are going to be run in the fall will be quite different. They may be staggered. It's
Right.
so many complications.
And then and then for us, it's like, are our parents going to be willing to put their kids on the bus? You know, there's this whole set of arguments that you would think that nobody will actually take the bus.
Yeah.
So we'll see where that people are thinking.
Okay, thank you.
So the plan basically, I think that there's a public hearing at the June 6th, where we bring this budget to the council. Normally, I would run and get you guys bound copies, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to actually manage that this year. I will eventually get bound copies, but I'm going to just tell you right now, it's probably going to be a large PDF that I will, bookmark and everything. So I think basically the presentation that I was going to give to the council is pretty much the presentation that and the points that I've highlighted to you. So do you think that there's anything additional that you think I should bring to the attention of the council as a whole? I mean, we have a little bit, Jennifer and I do have some cleanup to do, like you noticed on the redevelopment fund, and we just want to make sure that all our numbers tie out and match. But anything else? Any suggestions?
No.
I had a question on the expenditure summary page for all departments, the senior transportation and the enterprise funds 36. So are we actually spending $200,000 on that, or is that an amalgamation of other contributions?
An amalgamation of other contributions.
Okay,
Well,
so
that's what their expense. Well, let me put it. Hold on, I can pull up their budget for you. That's what they said they were going to spend. They
There it
do.
is.
So this is their. Can you see that? So this is their budget. So yes, their budget for 2021 is $200,000.
right.
And their estimated revenue
Is
is 163,000. So this is see the stuff in yellow, so stuff that Jennifer and I need to go back and make sure is correct. But yes, they are pulling down from they had a bequest, and they are pulling down from that bequest annually. And it's a concern. It's very much a concern.
What is a concern? What is exactly concerning you?
Well, they're going to run out of money at some point.
I think they're going to run out of money.
And so they probably won't spend 200,000. And so but let's just say they pull, I think they have about, let me think, look here. So let's say they've got like 100,000, they have less than $100,000 of that bequest. And let's say they have to pull $25,000 a year out of that in order to balance. That gives that a rent, that gives that 4 years. So what happens after 4 years? There's only two options. One is you have to potentially cut the program, discontinue the program, or fund the program additionally from the general fund. At this point, we literally get no money from Morinda or Moraga. But Mary will tell you that but we continue to serve those communities. It's a little bit of a catch-22, because one of the reasons that she's able to get these new freedom funds, which is the bulk of the outside funding that she gets, is because she can show that it is a regional transportation program. So other than the $40,000 that the city contributes, those federal funds are the bulk, right? So if those were to go away, then you're kind of in a pickle. So you're right, we've sort of managed, we sort of managed to cobble this thing together. The bequest was really a huge, was something huge that allowed them to continue the program longer, because I think absent that, we would have been in that situation now.
So do we know how much money is left in the bequest?
Let's see. This is what
So the bequest
Jennifer
has two parts, right? There's one portion of the bequest that's for taxi service.
So it looks to me like at the end of this fiscal year, I'm going to have to sync up these numbers, that there's going to be about $65,000. And it looks like they use maybe $10,000 to $15,000 a year.
So there was
Okay.
58 at the end of last fiscal year.
There was 58 at the end of last year.
Yeah, so 53. This is 53,000, right, Tracy?
These numbers I'm not super confident about, but we'll clean these up.
Well, just take a look at it and see. I mean, if we're about to run off a cliff, at least we should know.
Mm-hmm.
If there was some way we can convince Moraga and Orinda to contribute, even a modest amount.
Well, I've tried every time that they cry the blues. They haven't got any money, and they're, they got holes in their streets and blah, blah, blah. So I don't think they're going to come forward, at least at the city level. Maybe some of their fundraising organizations can be tapped, but I'm sure Mary's approached them. She tries everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Orinda has a program that they say that they have a program that is funded by a foundation.
That's what I've heard. So I don't know if we're overlapping that program, if we're providing services there also.
Oh, you mean they've got their own bus service?
Not a bus, it's a volunteer driver service in private cars.
Okay.
But their residents still use the Spirit van. Maybe different residents use the Spirit van.
Anyway, it's worth a look. I think this is one. I remember when it got started, there was a lot of concern about us ending up paying a lot of money for this, and it has grown in cost. But I've supported it, but if they're not managing for the long term, it's not gonna work. It's gonna fall apart.
I just wanted to insert for the record that we still have no public comment.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Tracy, typically when you take the budget to the council, there are a couple of things that you take. One are the list of asks. We have not received any new requests this year. No.
Or I didn't really expect that this budget being a little bit of an emergency, what I call an emergency budget, that there weren't going to be a lot of asks.
Yeah. Okay, just wanted to know if there were. And secondly, we will provide a list of service reductions so that the public is aware of what the consequences of the $1 million cuts are going to be.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
I'm good.
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So, so I guess you'll make those changes, and then do you send that back to us before you bring it to council, or are we just going to see it fresh at council next time? Okay, super. Sounds good. Appreciate this. This is hard.
Okay.
Great. Nobody expected this, and it's going to be more work before being less work.
Yeah. Well, I do think we're in. I want the message to be that I think we're in pretty decent shape going forward, and we have a plan. I don't think we cut too deeply. I think we moved quickly and cut just deep enough. Not out of the woods yet. It's just a lot of unknowns, but I think we're not in dire shape, and we're certainly not in the shape that some of our neighboring cities are either. So I think that's actually the good news.
That's true. All right. Well, thank you.
All
So
right,
can
thank
we adjourn? Yes. All right. Adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.